also been responsible for planning and implementation of this initiative, as well as engaging with leadership of relevant stakeholders in government, businesses, and academia, and civil society at the highest levels to advocate and promote sustainable energy for all, which I think is something that we are all interested in seeing. Please give him a round of applause. Welcome him. Next, we have Jubril Adewale Tinubu. He's the Group Chief Executive of Oando, Nigeria. He's also a Young Global Leader alumnus. He, in 2002, led the largest ever acquisition of a quoted Nigerian company with the acquisition of Ajip and Unipetrol. And he's been an Africa Business Leader of the Year winner in 2007, an African Business Magazine and Commonwealth Business Council in 2010. Please welcome. Next, we have Sherry Berenbach. Sherry is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the United States of African Development Foundation in the United States. She has a 30-year career spanning microfinance and international banking. She's done international development work, including in-country programming in more than 24 countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. She sits on numerous boards. I'm sure she'll be a wealth of opportunity. Welcome, Sherry.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Ned Tozun. Ned is the president of D-Light Design in the United States. He's also a social entrepreneur. D-Light is a sustainable energy company looking to bring about revolution in that field for Africa and the world. Thanks for joining us, Ned. Appreciate it. Okay, as I said, I want to keep this discussion flowing. I want to keep it, we want to hear your voices. I will kick it off, as I tend to do, with a couple of questions that I'll throw out to the group. I'm not here to pick on anybody. I'm not here to like single anybody out. I think we all want to have a fulfilling discussion around energy and what the possibilities can be for the future. And so I jotted down a couple of questions and a couple of notes. And again, as I said, this question is meant for everybody. So anybody feel free to jump in and answer it. So on a continent that is full of natural resource wealth, where economic growth typically outpaces most other regions in the world, Africa is often referred to as the dark continent, with access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa at only 17%. So I'd like to hear what's being done in perhaps some of the countries that you live in, and how you can extrapolate what's worked there to other countries and perhaps the world, and specifically in Africa. Minister, let's start with you.
Thank you. I think that you're quite right, obviously. We are a very resource-rich continent. And I think that over the ages, over the years, in Nigeria, for instance, in the last 70 years, we have become Africa's largest producer in terms of oil and gas. Unfortunately, how that is parlayed into actual, real engagement of the polity all the way down the spectrum is a different issue altogether. I think for too long, Africa's middle class has had a squeeze. So you actually begin to have the wealthy and, of course, the poor, to put it in the best way possible. I think the work ahead of us now is to ensure that the output of these resources is adequately and efficiently, not to mention expediently, deployed all the way across the spectrum. And I think that feeds into so many aspects of our development in Africa, in terms of our economies, both in terms of the security issues we're seeing arising all over Africa, and the development nexus as well, both inside our nation states and across regional development zones in Africa. So you will find that the infrastructural deficit in the continent is extremely high, amongst other issues that we're finding. So we do have a lot of work in front of us. And I think in areas like Nigeria, food exploration and production country all these years, we are abundantly blessed with gas resources, and it is in gas that we can actually reach the real economy and commercialize it, industrialize it in such a way that it begins to generate employment and provide real jobs for the people. When you talk about petrochemical plants, fertilizer plants, central processing facilities, some of which are involved in, LPG, production and fabrication for the people, you are beginning to touch the real wealth of the indigence and the polity of your country. Crude is a highly technological and capital-intensive upstream venture, so it does not touch the vast population, while, of course, it provides revenues for the nation state. But we have to look at how we empower our polities, empower our peoples, and begin to enrich the very indigents upon whose land, or in whose land, we derive this wealth of natural resources from. So there are a lot of complex issues, I think, that surround this in Africa today.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yumkela, in Sierra Leone, we have seen Sierra Leone is a smaller country. You're talking about the giant of Africa here, and Sierra Leone, a much smaller country, but also abundantly blessed with natural resources. How are you? Are there is there something that can be extrapolated as to what they're doing in the bigger countries that you can look to a smaller country to do, or can you share insights for a giant like Nigeria as to what's been successful in Sierra Leone?
Have major anchor demand. They had major demand centers, but probably as a regional approach. So the whole issue of energy trading, transmission lines, common pipelines to share resources, not as gifts, but in terms of pulling resources together so they become a little bit more attractive for the private sector. One last comment I'll make is oil and gas. We have, even big Nigeria has not taken gas as serious as the minister has now pushed the country to do.
It's only become, it's now that it's sort of...
Yeah, it was an accidental find.
Mm-hmm.
The issue here was gas, but I hear in many forums, Nigeria is the gas country that happens to have oil. But here again,
we should all be so blessed.
I wish. Finally, the point here is all over Africa, we're discovering oil and gas. 9 out of the 12 discoveries in 2012 were in Africa. The question for African leadership today is the following. How do you capitalize on that resource to power your economies towards industrialization and economic diversification? It is that target that will make them realize the crucial importance of energy. And within that context, again, regional initiatives that make those markets attractive. Some can generate power and sell to others. Right. And we can all be lifted into prosperity. Those are the issues now we should look at, because what I hear a lot is LNG. Mm-hmm. You need the revenues, sure, but don't forget to power your economy, or what Minister said, LPG. A lot of women and children are dying in Africa because of lack of access to energy, basic energy sources. But I see Delight and Sherry will touch on decentralized distributed power.
I see them nodding their heads and eagerly waiting to jump into the conversation. And you know, Sherry, a lot of people that I've talked to here have said to me often that they don't see the benefits of having these rich natural resources at their disposal. And it's not just in Nigeria, it's across many African countries where people, you know, not in the middle class, say, yeah, I know we have oil, I know we have gas, I know we have bauxite, but my life has no bearing as to what happens with those materials.
Great point to raise. And from our viewpoint, we think it's really important that there is the kind of large infrastructure investment and policy regimes that you were talking about in terms of really developing, you know, the big economy. At the same time, what the U.S. African Development Foundation is very active in the rural areas and rural communities. And what we have come to recognize is that the model, let's say from the United States, where it was just a matter of time of waiting for the grid to reach the rest of the country, that's not really a model that makes sense for a country like Nigeria or Sierra Leone or truly for most of Africa. Because I think what we see is that there are large industry and population centers that, yes, will be powered and served by the grid, but there are a significant share of the population is really in the rural areas that are at great distances from these power centers. And so there's really a need for a new generation of technologies that will be driven through off-grid solutions, through smaller companies that will both generate and distribute, through household-level solutions. I think we're about on the eve of a lot of new innovation and technology to see how can we make energy affordable, accessible to even the most remote rural communities on the continent.
But Sherry, explain something to me like I'm a 2-year-old, because this stuff tends to fly way over my head. You said something interesting. that in many countries in Africa, people live far away from the big commercial centers, for example, Lagos. But when electricity was first introduced, if you had power centers in New York City or you had it in San Francisco, eventually it made it to El Paso, Texas. Why is that not a model that can work? And the United States most people don't think it, but the United States is actually a big country. And so why wouldn't it work here?
Well, it's not just that why it wouldn't work, but it's really more what is the sort of best opportunity for us. In the same way we all used to think that we would wait for the telephone company to bring, phone lines to throughout the country, and then the cell phone industry came in, and a whole new wave of technology found ways to bring down the cost, to make it more affordable and more accessible. And so there's really no reason to go about creating almost like a dinosaur approach to infrastructure when more nimble, more cost-effective, new kinds of solutions are being developed. And in fact, the USADF, my institution, has teamed up with General Electric and USAID to launch an off-grid energy challenge where we're making available $100,000 grants to small and medium enterprises that are developing new kinds of technologies to bring energy to rural marginalized communities. There's really no need to have the kind of centralization that we've had that you have in large countries like the United States, in part because there's a lot of hidden cost and loss of energy through long transmission and distribution. And there are really better solutions that are available today that we need to get onto.
And so, Ned, is that something that will be powered by the private sector and not necessarily the government? Or will it mean, as you said, the deregulation in some cases, which then will allow companies like yours to succeed?
Yeah, I think it's going to have to be a combination of a lot of different players and forces. And this is a huge, energy access is a huge problem. And there's certainly a need for further infrastructure development, especially when you have dense urban centers, dense communities of people. There it really makes sense to make that kind of infrastructure investment and to be thinking about resources like gas and oil. It's our view, so I'm with the company called D-Light. We make these decentralized off-grid solutions. And because I'm a product person, I have to just always show in examples to capture people's imagination. We make products, everything, from something small-scale solar up to solar home systems. But this is an example of a product. You charge it in the sun, and you get 4 hours of light at night. It replaces a kerosene lamp. So it's an example of, and we've been doubling every year in scale. We're currently selling up to 500,000 units every month, half of which in Africa. So there's clearly a demand and a growing demand for these products. And what we find, and in addition to that, once people get access to these kinds of solutions, they want more power. They want to charge more devices and do more things. And the technology trend for solar products is all moving in a direction where it's becoming possible to make these kinds of solutions very affordable, to break out the payments over time so people don't have to pay the upfront cost all at once. And that really opens up a huge opportunity. I think Sherry said it really well, of making an analogy to the mobile phone industry, where Africa, there's an opportunity here because there isn't this fixed infrastructure. You can actually do things in a much more modern and innovative way and capture some of the trends in technology that are happening. And it's our company's belief that the way the trend is moving is for these decentralized, market-driven solutions. It doesn't mean it's all going to be solar, but we think solar is going to be a big component of it, especially in reaching these more remote rural areas where it's just extremely costly to build the infrastructure. It's estimated that it would cost globally to get access to build the infrastructure for folks who are living off-grid would cost $700 billion just to build the infrastructure. That's not even considering the cost to power that infrastructure every year. So we really believe that there's some very exciting trends with technology that are going to enable customers living in rural villages to really just leapfrog and have a much more sustainable, renewable, clean source of power in their development. We're quite excited about that.
But how much does something, that device, cost versus somebody who's like, look, the kerosene is still going to be cheaper. I can't afford that.
So, yeah, actually, these products range between $8 to $10 retail. People tend to spend $4 or $5 a month on kerosene. So the payback is extremely fast. And our customers, they're savvy investors. These are smart people living in villages, and they know if they can save up that money, and a lot of them can save up money for $10 for a phone, they're willing to make that investment because it pays for itself. Where it's challenging is, this is unknown technology, so customers may be resistant at first, and that's really our job to educate the customer, do marketing, and have a solid warranty.
They emphasize over and over, and credibility, meaning that this is a public policy that the people want. In other words, their parliaments have approved, and that it will stay for some time. The kind of energy transformation we need and the expansion in power generation in Africa we need requires some of the big projects. I am strongly a supporter of off-grid solutions, but I say to even our friends that don't convince Africans that they just need lighting. African communities need power that enhances their productivity. So when we say off-grid, we mean a mini-grid that is 1 megawatt. So the people can add value to agricultural products. So they can store vaccines. Water can be pumped so the girls are not taken out of class to collect water. So it must be energy for productive uses that transforms the economies. So in looking at distributive power, we must look at mini-grids. But the issue of political risk is crucial. There's an African country we're working on now that it has all the basic fundamentals, long-term energy vision, strong laws in place, and a lot of incentives. But guess what? $300 million moving in when they need $4 billion. Political risk. Because these companies have to borrow money for 30 years, maybe. They're concerned about that. So my point is, there are countries that have overcome those risks, and I believe governments must be committed to do that. This is not charity. They did it for mobile telephone. Companies came in, and we always use that parallel, because I was here when Nigeria privatized the mobile phones in 2000, and I remember the arguments, selling state assets, but I bought a mobile phone here for about $700, $800, and it was analog. This is important to note that immediately it was privatized, people bought it. Africa, 4 million mobile phones around 2000. By 2013, 720 million. Our people see opportunity, they leapfrog. It's the same with distributive power. And of course, what the minister said, already we are doing studies now in Nigeria, Kenya, and elsewhere. The poor are paying 40, 70, 80 cents per kilowatt hour. By the time you get the diesel in, but not to talk of the opportunity cost when it's not there. So I just wanted to put it in context that long-term policy that is stable and predictable is crucial. Governments and our people have to know you don't just change your mind. The guy borrowed money already to begin to build a power plant. That's why the transparency of the policy, that it is openly debated and adopted as law, and the investment protection is put, is crucial. By the way, when I say private sector, I mean guys like Oando.
I was going to ask.
Locals.
Right, I was going to ask Oando. Yeah, what do you say to those comments?
Well, it is important to have, TLC. Like you said, I like the acronym, actually. However, I think that what tends to happen is that the state used to control a lot of the resources on our continent. That's a throwback from colonialism, right? Governments have come in, and the demand, population growth has just been incredible. So we're going to be, Nigeria alone in 2050 will be 400 or 500 billion, so it'll be the third largest country. Now, in that interim, okay, the resources of the state have not been able to fund infrastructure and fund the explosion of job opportunities, particularly and accordingly the consumption of these resources which we have, which we consistently export. And what we've found is that when we've broken through the aspect of commercialization and liberalization, first and foremost, in whatever form, albeit a troublesome process of privatization. For example, when the privatization I went through in the year 2000, it was transparent. It was an advert in the newspaper. We advertised. So we have responded to the advertisement. We created a consortium. We were all like 29 years old, so we were called the Eaglets Consortium, and then everybody said we had no chance of winning. Eventually, we put our business plan in. We won. The first day we showed up at work, there was a demonstration out there, and everybody was carrying placards saying we don't want Eaglet managers. Like the minister said, you face labor issues. It took us a couple of weeks of engaging them and making them understand that we plan to do something good out of it. And thereafter, we were able to reward people, computerize the operations, reduce the staffing initially, then grow the business from 500 to 5,000 employees and from $50 million enterprise value to $5 billion in 10 years. The policy was there. We engaged and we encountered a lot of regulations that the principle was there, but we had to change them over time. So it's a two-way street. You can't have a framework which is ready-made on day one for a continent like Africa. It's going to evolve. So somebody said to me, never confuse a clear sight of vision with a straight line of execution. We thought, for example, the regulation on the downstream will occur within 2 years of us buying into the company. Till today, we haven't got the regulation. That's 14 years after. So we diversified into the gas industry, which didn't have a regulated ceiling pump price. With government policy, with the help of the minister, we got licenses to build out pipelines. Okay, we put a pipeline system in Lagos that has 130 industries that have been shifted from diesel. So I can officially tell you I've retired from the diesel cabal now. Because gas, there's a better return out of gas. And we built gas pipeline systems in 4 regions in the country, and we continue to build that. We got a license to build a central processing facility, which will focus on taking gas for the domestic market only. And we're doing that in conjunction with AGIP. We have approval with ENI to do that. So the policy changes. And I have pipelines, for example, that we've built that have 130 kilometers today. My regulatory approval is for 7 kilometers. And the question is, I can either keep going back and forth to the regulator to extend it, because there's always a gap, a lag time, or we can keep building out these things. Now, we can take the risk because we're a local company. But the difference, what we're able to do now is take our business model, take it abroad, and raise capital abroad, okay? And we accept local risks, but we run a global operation that will extract capital. So I think one of the big things that we do need to look at is that a lot of our development is not necessarily going to come from straight-line foreign investment who can't accept all the risks. It'll come with joint ventures. We'll come with companies taking risk, finding partners, and saying, let's do what we do best in Nigeria, take the challenges, take you through, and you provide the capital for us. I mean, you mentioned the telecoms. I mean, telecoms in Nigeria, really, the licenses originally were one South African company whose share price dropped when they won the license, and 2 Nigerian companies. I was involved in one of them, which we ended up selling. It's now Airtel today. It started in my garage in the house, and we all put a whole and we formed a small consortium and built it until we got enough capital to pay for the license. The other company, Glo, is also Nigerian. And so these jobs, these investments are being done by local indigenous players who've become large. But there was a lot of vendor financing which came from foreign telecoms providers who took a risk on us and loaned us millions of dollars, okay, on the basis that these were management teams they can trust. So I think we do need to look at these models again and understand that, this so-called risks, political risk, is trounced by an economic opportunity that's so vast, okay, that you cannot help but be in here. And I think we're seeing the results with the likes of GE. I mean, the minister said we have a power system that has just come in. It's just been, the companies will start low and eventually kick off. But the difference is you cannot ignore a market that has 4,000 megawatts of installed capacity and has 4 times the population of South Africa, and South Africa has 40,000 megawatts. So we need 40 times the investment to increase the GDP per capita consumption of electricity. So it will evolve and it will happen.
Can I add a point?
Please.
I think part of what he said there is important for government officials, the learning process. What can they learn from practical experiences of companies that are venturing into the energy system, and in that process, they help to modify policy to facilitate more investments coming in? Because some of the projects, some of our partners, USAID, Power Africa, are looking at what they call the transactional approach. Right. What can they do to get a transaction, for example, if there was a project already? The best one they just gave us is the wind farm in Kenya. Stock for 9 years, negotiations, private sector ready, but the wind farm is not moving. So the US and others moved in to say, okay, what is blocking this investment? So what can we do to remove the barrier and get this investment going? That required probably just a couple of transactions, yeah? The point here is, what do you learn from that that helps you modify public policy so you crowd in more investments and scale up? What they are doing, probably you need 10 more companies in Nigeria to do. Somebody made the honest comment yesterday in one of our panels on energy. He said, frankly, we've been looking at oil. We've really not started looking at industrializing this nation now that we know we're the 8th largest gas country in the world. Beyond LPG, some of what Minister mentioned, fertilizer, plastics, the whole value addition dimension. For a number of countries, they make a clear long-term plan with milestones, because as other companies get in, adding value, the whole sector becomes profitable. But that requires dedicated, yes, a long-term vision, some long-term policies, and the agility to learn and adjust, but all with one purpose: encouraging the private sector, local and international, to do those JVs and coming big time, because the energy deficit is huge. 600 million Africans without.
Please.
Yeah, I'll jump in because to me, people talk about an energy deficit. I see that as the energy opportunity or the energy market. And I want to emphasize the importance of local companies. My organization, USADF, really only supports 100% African-owned and managed companies, because we believe it really takes a certain amount of knowing the local market, the local distribution channels, the local culture, to create different kinds of solutions that are really going to be effective in the markets that we're trying to penetrate. I agree that there's room for outside technology, but it really needs to be sort of a locally led effort. So I'm delighted to hear the kind of work that you're doing. I also want to emphasize that while we've been talking about the off-grid, people immediately think about the household solution, and the household solution is very important, but we've seen a lot of very interesting innovations that are much more at the enterprise level. For example, here in Nigeria, in the first challenge that we did, where we made awards last November, one of the companies is a company called GVE that is bringing in solar panels to create refrigeration for cold storage for produce. And once again, it's making that cold storage for produce available in the rural areas for smaller producers who normally would have much more substantial agricultural losses or post-harvest losses. So we are seeing these kinds of solutions not just for households, but in ways that can increase productivity and add value in the local economy.
And just sticking on this theme, how do we bridge this gap between bringing together investors who would gladly support off-grid solutions but don't know where to find them, and the scores of small-scale grid projects in Africa that are looking for investment? How do you marry those two together? How do they come together? Is it something like this, or do they happen away from these types of events?
Yeah, for us, we really, when we got into this market, it was something, there were, I think, a couple thousand units being sold every year in the whole African market. Investors were very skeptical, and we really had to convince our investors that there was even a market. And actually, Sherry in Calvert Foundation, which was where she was at before, was one of our first supporters. It really took kind of investors who had that vision to be able to invest in us. Now, actually, that we're getting the kind of scale where we're at today, there's a lot of other entrants into the space. There's actually an increasing amount of capital that's going into funding renewable solutions. And I don't think there's as much capital constraint, at least in the space that I operate in, for companies. And we've since been able to raise further equity. We've been able to get debt funding from commercial banks. We've even been able to get some grant funding to accelerate the work we're doing. So I think the capital markets are starting to wake up that this is a big market opportunity, but I think it's still early days. And right now there's about 4% market penetration of these kinds of technologies in the off-grid areas. But I think you said it really well, Mr. Umakala. I mean, these are not ultimately what people need in the end. This is just a start. It's just lighting. And people ultimately want everything that people with electricity have. And that's something that our company, we are expanding our offering to be able to get there. And I think there's an interesting range of solutions, from microgrids to larger scale solar products to other kinds of solutions. And we just really believe in letting the market dynamics work and having a level playing field in the market. So there are many countries where these kinds of products are taxed significantly, whereas kerosene and other gas solutions are subsidized. And that's a problem, because then the market forces can't work. So we just really believe in letting customers decide with a level playing field in the market and letting those market forces work and creating these essentially democratized and distributed energy solutions, which is where we think the future is.
To be honest, you guys are struggling. We have a practitioner network, about 1,600 social entrepreneurs and NGOs, D-Light and others, who are involved in this space. A number of them are struggling to get finance. They do proof of concept. In some cases we've seen, they do proof of concept in 2 or 3 villages. They've proven that the people will pay. The women collect the money very diligently because they suffer the most from lack of energy access. But then they want to scale up to 10 more. No cash. We've worked with Suraj in Ghana in the cook stoves. Suraj proved 50,000 energy efficient cook stoves distributed. He wanted to expand across Ghana. Nobody ready to give cash. So the financing for bottom of the pyramid solutions is still a problem. But at a higher level, you talked about political risk. We've set up now under Sustainable Energy for All a finance committee led by Bank of America and the Brazilian National Development Banks. All the regional development banks are in, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs. I listen to the bankers almost every month, and de-risking. I just keep hearing financial de-risking. What I gather from them is, in a number of developing countries, particularly in Africa, we don't have enough financial instruments to really even cover the commercial risks, foreign exchange risks. So companies come in, major companies for the kinds of project Minister was talking about, and of course they say to her, can you go over to Ministry of Finance and get a sovereign guarantee for us? Exactly. That's a major problem. Major issue, and what we're discussing now is, what can we do, including green bonds and other financial instruments, to really get the massive investments we need into that sector? So financial risk or lack of finance for the small operators, and many banks would not want to lend to small operators. But in Kenya, they're learning from microfinance. The link with mobile payments is expanding the kind of work D-Light and others are doing. We don't have that yet across. The financial risk issues, but also availability, is really slowing that down, and of course, it's going to be a bigger problem for the large projects going forward.
And are there lessons, for example, to be learned from a country like Ethiopia, which has made a concerted effort to make renewable energy part of the drivers of their economy? Can big countries like South Africa and Nigeria learn from that? And why have they decided to do that? And what was the impetus for that decision?
Because the reality is not either or, meaning it's not just oil or gas. You look at your energy resources. If God gave you a lot of hydropower, you build it up. You integrate. The example I like to give my Nigerian friends is that in Norway, they're looking now at driving the renewable share probably to 70%. This is an oil and gas country. Why? The Norwegians tell you, they say, Mr. Junkeler, we have hills here, mountains. We've proven already. About 60% of the electricity is from hydro. They say now we know we can go from 800 meters to 1,000 meters, but we use wind energy to pump the water up and let it down. Our gas we sell and we invest in our sovereign funds for future prosperity, for the prosperity of future generations. So for African countries, that's why we push regional integration. There are, like Guinea. Guinea is our water table in West Africa. We've already costed the project there. Nobody's taking it yet. Hinga is another one. But I know Ngozi and Minister and others are now looking at Hinga as a regional project, hydro project, can supply West Africa, Southern Africa, and of course you integrate your gas and other resources, and we can become energy rich. So Brazil is doing similar. So not only Ethiopia. So the point here is integrating energy technologies and systems. That's the way of the future.
You want to jump in on that, Mr. Shimo?
I suppose the only point I'd make is just leading to what he said regarding regional markets and taking regional pooling of energy requirements. So whilst renewables are good, there's going to be a lag time between the prices coming down for us to get the benefit. In the interim, like you said, we use what we have, and in whatever God gives you, you exploit, first of all, before you ask what man can give you. And what I would therefore say, something like West African gas pipeline, which we have, we need to be able to maximize the use of assets of that nature. It's already a regional pool that has been created, and And it's fundamental. I think that, you will always find the multinationals looking at foreign investments to focus on the export market. Sure. That's where the returns are. That's what de-risks the investments for them. If you drill and you can load the cargo of crude and export it, there's $100 million out. You've de-risked by $100 million on a daily basis, for example. The local entrepreneurs only have a local market to deal with. Okay, they can raise capital offshore, but we do need the access to the acreage to be able to develop gas resources and sell into the local market. So that pipeline ought to be full and can be full with indigenous participation. And these are the areas where we need further support and enabling environment to be able to achieve. And we're doing that. For example, Nigeria has a local content policy, which the minister has really driven the last couple of years, that is transferring assets to local companies who are effectively focusing on the local market. So, for example, we've had indigenous companies sign gas supply agreements to new plants that are about to be built, okay, because there's an incentive to do so. They're not interested in the export market. The priority is neighbor to neighbor, look for an investment, exploit. So I think that should be put on the front burner as a policy to drive such that we can take these regional projects and provide African solutions for African problems.
Is that what you're sort of envisioning with the news that I've seen, which is that you're prepared to acquire Conoco's Nigerian assets? Is that something that is on the table?
Well, most definitely. I mean, those assets also are rich in gas, 65% of those assets in gas. And as the minister mentioned, we do have a central processing facility approval as well. And we will be able to utilize a lot of that gas for the local domestic gas market. That gas is there, and those assets supply 30% of the gas which goes into the Shell LNG plant which gets exported. Once again, it's down to dotting the lines and looking for the incentive and aligning investment criteria with country needs. Country needs cash to come in, but by the time the foreign royalties come in and goes into the coffers and trickles all the way down, there's a lag time. Now, when we provide gas for an industry, we provide instant jobs. Like we've seen companies who have doubled and tripled their size simply because we've taken local gas and a local distribution pipeline straight to their doorstep, invoice them after they've consumed, so they have a credit as opposed to paying for the diesel in advance, and able to drop their operational costs substantially because they're no longer reliant on fuel. So there is a big link between indigenous participation and indigenous welfare. It goes, or indigenous prosperity. Right. And I think it's an area which we focus on. It's a priority for us, and the rest of the indigenous companies all take very seriously.
Thank you. I want to open up to the audience. We have let's do that for 20 minutes because I'm sure there's some questions from our audience that will be quite interesting for the rest of us. So if you just raise your hand, I believe that the room is small enough. Oh, there's a microphone. So there's a microphone if you raise your hand if you have a question. One person here, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nasir Gewa. My question is for Wale. There is a point that has been agitating my mind in the last 2 days, and you spoke about it during your discussion. You actually provided the answer, but my question is that during the course of the discussion so far, we had that there are 200 million youths in Africa, and most of them are unemployed. We said for Africa, we've got to find Africa's solution for our integration. And it is in our interest to integrate because with that, we'll be able to find solution to our security issue. You said earlier on that you had to take a reverse gear for some of your investment in the region. Have you given up? Are you going to use the platform ECOWAS and OAU to put more pressure on African leaders to really create the right platform for us to be able to have an environment for investment and engage our very, very energetic and productive youths? Thank you.
I don't relent in trying to convince our leaders. I'm very active. I think the enabling environment is really a big step forward in creating those jobs. Because at the end of the day, any licensing approval that you require that you can get within a short space of time, enables you put people to work very, very quickly. And oftentimes, like I mentioned, the issue to do with subsidies, it's taken some countries quite a while to realize that, when you reduce the subsidies, you create the jobs. Because It's not that the funding is not there, but it's a misalignment of resources. And so, we can either, subsidize something, for example, or which the benefit doesn't really get to the people, or create jobs which the direct benefit is in their pocket. So we never stop. We're big advocates of getting the enabling environment, and we never stop talking. We keep trying and trying and trying. And there is movement. There's very, very big movement, because look at the commercialization across the continent. And one of the big commercializations that we're also seeing is even the PIB, which the minister is driving in our side, which will see a very, very vibrant national oil company, which will be commercialized. And by virtue of it being commercialized and being driven on a return, it's going to create a tremendous amount of jobs, even in our own local environment.
But there's been some difficulty in bringing that to bear. What are some of those challenges that you face with regards to the PIB?
Well, I think that it's fairly straightforward. The PIB we had worked on very ardently, and I got personally involved in it, working for long hours with the various committees. And that was because inherent in the PIB were all the major reforms to try and ensure that the oil and gas sector moved towards more transparency, more accountability, more security for investments, particularly medium and long-term investments. And of course, we did want a few changes in the fiscal regimes, which we felt hitherto had not been particularly favorable towards the country. In the PIB, I think, or some of the issues around the PIB, to a large extent, were fiscal regime issues, which up till now are still being looked at on the premise of both the multinationals and indigenous firms as well. But the flip side of that is that the delays in the promulgation into law of the PIB, because at this point in time it's out of our purview, it's of course in the hands of the National Assembly, are that you do not actually have the legal or legislative backing to take some of the major strident measures in terms of making the industry or the sector a lot more accountable, much less corruption prone. Because whether we like it or not, over the last 25 odd years or so, the oil and gas sector in Nigeria has been known as variously unaccountable, non-transparent, and corruption prone. There is, of course, the vast possibility of the manipulation of even laid down processes that are already put in place. And unless you have backing of the law to actually tear apart these established entities and create, as Wale said, entities that are competitively driven and that are accountable to the state and to the people, it is very difficult, obviously, to erode the sector of some enshrined methods and modes of behavior. So I think that we were, of course, hoping that that would happen. Having said that, I think that whilst, of course, without it being promulgated into law, we cannot go ahead and create a separate national oil company. It's not possible. You know, you cannot create an asset management corporation with equity and shareholding. It must be legislatively backed. You cannot create new regulatory institutes or entities which are pseudo or semi-independent. So they have general oversight, but they are independent entities that can exercise the right to regulate properly, such as the NERC does now in the power sector quite efficiently. So it is a major setback from a legal point of view. What we can do going forward is to audit our processes, and that is already happening. Audit our processes in oil and gas, particularly as they relate to the revenues, incomings and outgoing revenues, you know, in our sector. I'm talking about from the government end, the National Petroleum Company, the Nigerian National Petroleum Company, and ensure that the processes are actually being followed and managed in the way that they should be. And when where we find that there are gaps, and there will be leakages, taking adequate and aggressive steps to correct that. So that is happening right now. And I'm expectant, highly expectant, that over the next 3-4 months or so, the implementation of the solutions to cover any gaps will begin to be felt, throughout the economy, because these are highly topical issues at this point. And obviously, the issues of corruption, the issues of having very strong laid-down processes and frameworks, particularly in the oil and gas sector. And I say that for Nigeria because this is the sector that drives the entire economy. This is what we feed off. Everything else right now, as much as we're trying to diversify our economy, is still secondary in terms of revenue production for the entire country. So we do have to be very, very aggressive in terms of ensuring that our processes are cleaned out and they are implemented in the way and manner that they should be. Now, it has taken years in the making to get them to where, we found them. So it will take a little ways, but it must be done. And we must obviously push this with the optimum will at our disposal during this period of time.
Mr. Yunkala, you wanted to...
I just thought I may make a footnote on what Minister has said. You asked us about examples of where things are working. But I think also when she gave the analysis now for PIB, I think the countries that are discovering new oil and gas deposits or are looking at their own energy sectors in Africa should also learn about what they should not do.
Right.
What they should not do.
Is that a message
and
for
what will
countries
keep
like
them
Ghana
down?
or...
Yeah. So one of the issues, I say this public, because we're campaigning heavily on that, and I was telling Minister the other day, I need the leadership of Nigeria. We must also now begin to look at gas flaring reduction. We're launching a global initiative backed by the Secretary General President of the World Bank and others, because we believe that gas can be used to help economies. But it's not just simply by banning it. It's exactly what Minister said. What are the public policies to incentivize? What are the public policies to create more companies like what Wale has? Because we need the LPG. Let me give you a number. Globally, we have 4 million premature deaths every year due to household air pollution. So a lot of charcoal, some of the kerosene, and other biomass that are used. 4 million premature deaths, 70 to 80% women and children. It's worse than HIV, AIDS, and malaria combined. Now, we cannot solve that problem, save 4 million lives, if we don't have those LPG markets, if we don't have those LPG canisters. Now, that's not government. That's companies like his, maybe, but we need maybe 50 more. So my point here is, and that's the advocacy we're doing across Africa. When Mozambique, Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda announce they have oil and gas, we say, great. Now they leapfrog. Now they will not do what we did wrong in the West. But at the same time, when newer players, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and others are all announcing their finds, we're saying, can you learn from those mistakes? And you say, fine, we do it different. We create incentives, but we also ask government. Because I pitied the minister as she was listing some of the obstacles. I say, wow, I wish it was automatic, as I see in Europe or even in Latin America, where the parliament says, this policy is great, we fast track. We drive it and get it done in a year. But Wale does not have to wait 19 years for public policy to be done. The guy has borrowed money already.
We have a question here. Yes, sir.
My name is Feifa Mayor. Just a quick follow-on question to the minister about the PIB. Has the PIB gotten too big to be passed out once? And is there a place for breaking it up and passing it just to get rid of the current statuses we have right now?
Well, actually, I think that's a really good question because we've been pondering it for some time now. Perhaps I shouldn't say so here, but I do think that it should actually possibly be broken up at this point in time, if that will allow it to move forward in a more expedient fashion. And we deal with it more in modules. But of course, that is something that we have to look at alongside the National Assembly, since it is within their purview. So we are not actually allowed to work on it during this period of time. We can only have discussions with them in terms of where we think it should be moving and when they have issues and questions they want us to answer. But I wanted to quickly say, as a follow-up to what you were saying, that I think that government is in a very strong position and really should take, particularly in emerging economies, the kickstart position in moving areas such as LPG compressed natural gas, and so on and so forth, into the mainstream economy, because it's quite difficult otherwise. We expect that the private sector will come on board and will actually move it forward for us. But in terms of starting it off, we've actually put in place a very comprehensive program, and pilot projects are now moving out. Compressed natural gas, which a lot of Nigeria doesn't know much about, already has a couple of pilot projects in the Delta state, and they have been highly successful, particularly with taxi drivers. Unfortunately, they have been so successful, the taxi drivers, that they are hiding them from their counterparts and colleagues because they don't want them to know how little they are now paying to motor their vehicles. So that hasn't helped us at all. We're now looking for other ways, of advertising our find and for moving it into other cities, because the cost of changing around their engines is actually very little. So we're doing all that right now. But these appear to be little drops in the ocean when you look at a country of 160-something plus, million people, and the deficit that we have in the country, particularly in terms of gas and gas infrastructure. Now, I was saying to the Power Africa chaps in one of our energy sessions a couple of days ago, and you were there as well, that in terms of powering Africa, we must take a couple of steps back and look at the fundamental infrastructural deficit in the continent. Without the right infrastructure, particularly for gas, of which we have so much, say in Nigeria, we will not be able to power those IPPs, to get the energy that we so desperately need to the people. And gas infrastructure is not built overnight, neither is it cheap. But of course, we have found that there's an amazing deficit in it, which doesn't really exist. So we are actually fighting tooth and nail right now in Nigeria to work from the answer backwards, to the question, to create what we call short-term solutions to getting more gas to power the grids, and then short to medium solutions, while we also work on the long-term solutions in terms of the major gas pipeline backbone infrastructure, which, as I say, is highly capital intensive, and for which we're trying to bring in major investment and PPPs as well to build. So we really have to look at these fundamental questions. We talk about regional integration and cooperation. There is a lot, I think, that can be done, as has been mentioned here, in terms of cross-border solutions, because a lot of the investment that will come into Africa for some of our energy solutions is too big to actually be managed by any one individual nation state. So we do have to work on, cross-border regional integration and solutions for quite a number of our energy needs, while individual nation states also look internally at what they can do or what they must do to move forward. And this is why I said from the beginning that at the end of the day, it becomes a mixed bag. Right. Because I love these solutions that you are bringing forward. They may be very short-term, they may be very basic, but I think that they need to piggyback on the bigger solutions that governments are pushing. And I think that actually they do need to be brought to the fore and integrated in terms of the government's response. So even though we know they're short-term and they're not the greater solution, they do serve a major critical purpose for us.
Yeah. And I just want to add, we've really seen government policy make a huge difference in the adoption of these technologies. In East Africa, for several years, there have been no duties and no VAT tax on these products. And as a result, there's been huge market share that's opened up for these products. So in Kenya now, it's nearly 10% of these off-grid households have at least some solution for lighting that's not burning kerosene. And that's amazing. That's an amazing transformation over just 4 or 5 years. Nigeria, there has been duties, and it's recently been waived. So I have to say thank you to the minister for that, because that's really going to
incentives, yeah?
Right. Well, it's really going to open up the market, and it helps put our products and these types of solutions at a more level playing field. Kerosene is still subsidized, so it's not a completely level playing field, but it's a more level playing field, and something that is going to really allow these types of innovative solutions. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to just be these types of products. I mean, there's a range, but market forces are going to be more free to compete and have these types of innovations transform the market in ways that we can't really imagine today. Anyway, I have to say thank you for that.
Can I just very quickly mention, because it comes up a lot, the gas flaring issue. And we were one of course, the greatest offenders over the years. But we have vastly reduced, and I remember the Shell Exploration and Production global bosses were saying this a couple of days ago in the Energy Forum. In Nigeria, we have vastly reduced our gas flaring profile. We expect that by 2020, we will be within the acceptable margins. There is no such thing as complete removal of gas flaring. It comes naturally with any E&P operation anywhere in the world, but there are internationally accepted parameters for gas flaring. And by 2020, we should have got there. But the way to get there, which is the way we are going, is to ensure that there's a complex framework in place, which includes, as I said, the central processing facilities, the LPG facilities and distribution we're talking about, and of course, major industrial gas entities such as petrochemical plants and fertilizer plants, methanol entities as well. So,
country investment in strategic industries. So, for example, in cocoa, should Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire not join forces to transform the sector and add value?
Thank you. And right in front of him, there's a gentleman in a maroon tie. He's right in front of me here. If you could take the microphone to him.
I'm sorry, but do we mention names? Or Naif Haddad with CCC. The question I have actually is, first, I totally agree with everything that has been said, but the question is, where is education in this? Is there education to the ones who are not even able to think how they can get education from villages, remote areas? Personally, I've been all over Africa, and it makes me so sad when I see the looks at so many little kids that are not having that chance. So where is that in it, please?
Okay, and finally, Vuyo, your question, and that's the last question, unfortunately. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to, my name is Vuyo Mahlati, I'm from South Africa. It's very encouraging to all the panelists, the President and the ministers, to actually deal with the difference between poverty, particularly absolute poverty and inequality. So my question is specifically, how are we, having recognized that, and also from a perspective of the MDGs 2015, where absolute poverty was the focus in terms of the MDGs, and the fact that those were distribution neutral. As we move forward from an Africa 2063 perspective, how are we going to make sure that we deal with issues of distribution and ensuring particularly that we extend further the issues that deal with women to link what I believe the case we're dealing with of the girls is a reminder to us of the importance of linking insecurity with the issue of inequality. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you for your questions. Let's start with the first question that was posed to Nigeria's finance minister, the question of social safety nets and accessibility.
Well, thank you very much. On the social safety net issue, I think the starting point is really to maybe paraphrase or repeat what Prime Minister Duncan of Cote d'Ivoire said. When you talk to many people, what they want is a decent job. You know, they really don't want handouts as such. So we have to be careful when we're thinking of a safety net. So the first safety net we think about is really how to create more jobs for people. But beyond that, you also have to admit that in the immediate, even if you create the jobs, just as they found in Brazil, there may be some people who can't take it up because they don't have the skills. And that's where the safety net comes in. And some people who are very vulnerable. And so what we have been doing is looking around the country to see what we're doing. And if you look at different states within Nigeria, there are states that have very good programs, you know, to try and take care of their population. It could, in different areas, some it's health, some it's education, some it's agriculture, which is part of the safety net. And then you look at the federal government, and we also have programs here and there, but the whole picture, well, how do you say, the sum of the parts do not amount to a whole. So you come away with a feeling that in this country, we don't really have a safety net program. So what we're thinking is taking some of the good examples at state level, where governors have done good things, at federal level, where we've also done some good. I'll just give a couple of examples. And you know, some states have done very well maternal mortality, in making sure that women don't die. We look at those examples, they don't die in childbirth. The federal government, under a program by the president, has also done well in the program of saving 1 million lives. And 400,000 lives. You asked for numbers. The calculation now is 7,000 health workers were trained through this program and sent into the rural areas. We actually have names, and 400,000 women were helped. We have their names by ward, so we can show it. And then we have, there's another program in Kano, conditional cash transfers to get girls into school. 40% enrollment improvement has happened. Even this saving 1 million lives is tied to a conditional cash transfers program. Right. So what we're trying to do is now say to ourselves, let us join hands, let's get a group together to think through this. Right. What have the states done well? Let's take the programs working there and in the federal government and ideas from elsewhere and build a comprehensive safety net that targets education and health. Let's do it for the next 10 years. This is all brainstorming. We're still at the beginning. And put the money into it. Donors are putting in, hundreds of millions of dollars into these programs, but they're all scattered. Can we then develop a momentum, and a program that we can look at, where Nigerians can look and say, okay, this whole thing makes sense to me, and not just disparate things. So that's what we're doing with the social safety net, that we're just embarking on that journey. And we hope to be able to build this within the next year.
President Macky Sall, unfortunately, your name was mentioned when this question was raised, so it comes to you. Nobody spoke about science and innovation, mathematics as being catalysts for this growth, this development that we're talking about. What are you doing about it?
Je vous remercie. Thank you. I'm very happy to talk about science and mathematics because myself, I am a product of science as a geologist and geophysicist. You have asked the issue, the question about scientific education. For our development, we need a lot of engineers. We need a lot of technicians. We need diversified expertise, and paradoxically we have the kind of teaching as well, especially as far as Senegal is concerned. We have general education whereby we put emphasis on university education, and where we do a lot of arts subjects, because when we had our independence, maybe our founding fathers were from the humanities, and the countries started humanities education. It's not a bad idea. I'm not against literature. You need everything to build a world, but you need to do things properly. You're going to have a country where 70% of people will go to university. I've had a secondary diploma which is skewed towards the arts and humanities. We have had a reform in education in Senegal where we put emphasis on teaching mathematics and the sciences. And we have a new orientation now to have vocational training. We even have an institute for mathematics, which is an African institute for mathematics, whereby we select the people who have Nobel Prize in mathematics, those who have gotten prizes in mathematics, who should come and teach young Africans who have been chosen after their high school diplomas before they go for a master's degree, so that we can have a critical mass of scientists that can go into diverse areas. That was done and that is continuing. We are also developing a professional subjects, courses in the university, so that Africa will continue to have quality resources. Because if you have natural resources without human resources, it is the others that will come and evaluate your natural resources. For example, the oil-producing countries It is other geologists from elsewhere that will say you have oil or not. This is the quantity, this is the quantity, and the characteristics. So finally, you are still dependent on them. So it is imperative that Africa should give a lot of resources to training professional officers, especially in high-tech sciences. You should think of high-speed train, aviation, and in all sectors, in medicine and any other sector. There's also agriculture as well. There is high-level education should be given so that our continent can make progress.
Minister, we are running out of time, so I just want to move on to the other questions, if that's okay.
I just want to give them information for half a minute. Parallel to this session of the forum, there was an African Innovation Prize that honored science and technology. 10 Africans were chosen. Wonderful work. And one of them won for technology that helps to set bones faster than ever before. Just to let you know that science and technology is great.
Paul Palman, your views.
Gas side of things. Of course, in terms of LNG, which is quite profitable, there are no issues at all. In terms of getting gas to the northern parts of the country, again, this comes down to what I've already talked about in terms of the infrastructure deficit and the gas backbone pipeline infrastructure. But we have the major AKK pipeline, which we have already started rolling out, the Ajaokuta-Kaduna-Kano pipeline. So that has already begun. We are still, of course, in the process of ensuring that more investments come in for that. But that pipeline is already, for want of a better way to put it, in the pipeline. I don't know what else to say there. Can I very quickly just comment, because I didn't get a chance to say this, that I think that it would be very nice, Dr. Ola, if you could have a chat with the Executive Secretary of the Nigerian Content. You know, you probably have already met. I think that there is so much in there that young people can take, you know, and move forward with. And I think that, as Wale said, in today's oil and gas sector, all the skills are necessary. So we'll go from finance through engineering, mechanical, electrical, business skills, hotel and catering skills, because people forget that in every development, you do need to set up, you know, services that provide for the people. And those are quite profitable. The obvious ones, of course, are petroleum engineers, civil engineers, geologists, etc. But I would like to point out very succinctly that I am an architect by original profession, and Wale is a lawyer. So you can actually...
You can make it.
So yes, it does take very strong operational and leadership skills, I think, to come into the sector. But once you have those, I think the field is wide open.
I wanted to get to your question because I didn't even realize there's a lot of people sitting behind me. So.
Hi, my name is Zainab Mahmoud. I'm a global shaper from the Kano Hub. I, like the previous lady, is also in the medical field. I'm a medical doctor. My question, because I see a common theme when we talk about sustainable solutions or the youth, is the future. And I wonder how much we're really investing in the future. Today in Nigeria, it's easier to secure a scholarship to study something in oil and gas, whether it's from the private sector or from the government. So how much is the government really planning for the future, or the private sector? Thank you.
For the future, in what sense?
In terms of investing in sustainable solutions, providing training for experts in that sector.
Well, I think that in terms of, because we've discussed a lot of that today, and I do think that all that is going on simultaneously as we're looking at the other hardcore, you know, problems that we have to deal with here and now. I must say that in Africa and in emerging economies as a whole, you are faced with so many hard-on problems that range from the actual everyday fundamentals of running the business to political issues, which are very real and very tough. We live in a very brutal political climate in most of Africa. So you're dealing with real issues all the time and very hard issues. But we are looking at all those at the same time. We have nuclear solutions being looked at, frightening as it is to me, you know, I mean, but we have a lot of other solutions being handled by other parts of the government who have that responsibility, you know, at the same time.
I think part of that future the youth should be concerned about is the future where climate change pushes us to 4 or 6 degrees temperature rise. And I know in this discussion we've not said anything about energy efficiency.
Right.
60 to 70% of the greenhouse gases come from energy systems. The sad news for Africa is we contribute less than 3%. But all the studies, and those we discussed here at the World Economic Forum, all the studies show Africa will be the worst hit for somebody else's misbehavior. So I think the youth must be concerned. Therefore, what is the position of their governments on climate change? How do they take that position globally to say to others, we all have one planet? And so we said nothing about energy efficiency. It's related to climate change, but there's another dimension. If, even in Nigeria, introducing energy efficiency even more rapidly helps you do demand-side management. You save on building those power plants. You save and you invest in other kinds of infrastructure. So in sustainable energy for all, our narrative is energy access, energy efficiency, renewables. It is a package. Renewables and decentralized solutions help you drive access very fast before the power lines come, before the big infrastructure comes. But energy efficiency is also crucial, even in generation. There are 40 to 50% losses in generation transmission in a number of African countries, either because of antiquated infrastructure or just poor management. So I'm just saying, sorry, I made a segue into climate change, because you can't talk energy today, globally, without talking about climate change.
But I think, just to add to that, but I think the future certainly belongs to the youth, right? When it comes to energy resources, and it's very simple. You know, we account in Africa for 3% of global GDP, but we have something like 30% of the natural resources of the world that are unexploited are here. You know, in Nigeria, for example, we've got something like 10% of our resources is really what is exploited compared to what we should be doing. So there are going to be plenty of opportunities in the energy space for young people. We're dealing with a time when ministers were speaking about the question of the size of the pool of subsidies and how do you apportion those subsidies to create a better energy mix, for example. That's in the vanguard. That's going to happen. So you're going to see more subsidies in renewables, more subsidies going to LPG, for example, in a manner that you shift the dependence on fossil fuels towards renewables. And there are going to be great job opportunities because we have a local content policy that is creating substantial opportunities. I mean, for the first time in our nation's history, resources that have been invested in multinationals for the last 40 years are shifting to the private sector. And that private sector is indigenous, it's not foreign. And that private sector hires, you know, well-trained, well-groomed Nigerians or Africans, and even where they're not, because we actually do have other Africans in our system who join us. I mean, we're getting applications from people from Mozambique, South Africa, whatever, wanting to cross to live. I mean, this never happened before. Now, Africans want to move to other countries as professionals to work. Before, it used to be moving abroad. Right. That was the only destination, and that's a real change. So I think I'd rather have been your age than my age right now.
Well, on that note, I want to thank our panelists for a really engaging discussion. Clearly, there's so much more to talk about. We could spend, you know, a couple of hours doing that. But please give them a round of applause for their time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for joining us as well. Thanks so much, and hope you have a good day. Thank you.